I'm going to call this meeting to order. Thank all of the witnesses for being here today. We look forward to everybody's testimony. I'm pleased to spend this, which is my first hearing as a chairman of this subcommittee, focusing on a government policy that is such a bad idea that when it was first enacted in 2006, Congress immediately delayed its implementation for 5 years. And when 2011 rolled around, Congress again delayed implementation of this 3% withholding requirement for another year. Now the IRS is causing further delays of the withholding requirement until 2013 because, as the IRS says, implementation of it would simply be too difficult, even though they've had 6 years to get ready for its implementation. Since no one seems to interested in implementing this policy, hopefully this hearing can build on this Congress's successful bipartisan repeal of the 1099 reporting requirements and serve as the starting point for a congressional action to repeal this 3% withholding requirement. The original intent of this withholding was to close the tax gap. In other words, 3% withholding was supposed to reduce the amount of taxes that were owed by government contractors but that went unpaid. So in that sense, it's very similar to the 1099 reporting requirements that we took up already earlier this year in this committee and that this Congress subsequently repealed. Both the 1099 reporting and the 3% withholding requirements sought to close the tax gap through increased burdens on businesses of all types, but small businesses, as so often is the case, were hurt the most. Small businesses today already operate on thin profit margins with little room for any additional withholding. As has been discussed in this committee regularly this year, regulatory burdens fall particularly harshly on small business. And the 3% withholding requirement would be no exception. Many small business contractors, including those folks testifying here today, work for the government for less than a 3% profit margin. So the 3% requirement would force these contractors to wait until the end of the year, not only to get their profit, but also to cover all of their costs. Also troubling is the possibility that government contractors will not have the funds to pay their subs during a project and will have to find outside financing to complete projects. And I think all of us who are related or involved in the small business community these days know how much fun it is these days to try and get outside credit. Even worse is the fact that implementing this 3% withholding requirement means treating all small businesses and their contractors with suspicion. Instead of rewarding those small businesses that choose to compete for and win contracts, the government essentially pre-accuses them of cheating on their taxes. The government already requires all contractors to certify that they are in compliance with federal tax law, so one is left to wonder why we assume that they're going to break the law after they win a government contract. Furthermore, there's a burden, believe it or not, and this is so often the case in what we do in Washington, there's actually a burden on state and local governments as well. I look forward to taking the testimony today of the Treasurer from my home state of South Carolina as to the impact on the states. And there is a very real impact on the states. It's yet another unfunded federal mandate in this 3% withholding requirement. We also have witnesses from the Defense Department with us today to testify as to the great expense that this withholding requirement will impose and how these expenses far exceed any projections for additional tax revenue. It makes absolutely no sense for the DOD to spend $17 billion over 5 years to save less than $6 billion in the first year and only $200 million a year after that. The Joint Committee on Taxation has actually predicted that after the first year, all increases in revenues to the government from this proposed 3% withholding will come from interest that the government earns on the withholding. It's essentially forcing small business and other contractors with the government to float the government an additional 3%. It's completely outrageous, and I look forward to hearing from the small businesses today that will testify as to the other ways that this 3% withholding requirement will affect them.